Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm glad that you all could be here to share in the worship phase of our business meeting this evening. If you would, well, let me just ask you without going through it all. I guess all of you have heard the story of Jonah before, correct? I would imagine somewhere along the way, Bible school, wherever, Sunday school, certainly has come up. And we have probably occupied ourselves with discussing whether someone could live inside a whale for 3 days and all the other inanities that probably could be glossed over. I think when we do that, we miss some of the most important and vital parts of this story. There are a couple of them that I wanted to bring to your attention. First of all, the fact that, you know what happens with Jonah. The sailors become anxious. And Jonah tells them, well, I'm different from you in this way and in that way. And they decide to get rid of their problem by simply throwing him overboard. How often do we do that in life? We take what we think is our problem and we throw it overboard. But there's another thing here that I want to mention. Jesus talks at one point about something he calls the sign of Jonah. And there are various ways of interpreting that sign, but generally it's believed that he's referring to the fact that Jonah, who has all the outward appearances of being someone that is faithful, actually turns out to be faithless. But then the story turns. You know how the story turns after the whale. Jonah himself becomes one of the most faithful, maybe the most faithful person on earth. I'm going to leave that in your mind as I begin this evening. I took a walk yesterday down to the local post office. And it's an old sidewalk. And along the way, I don't know what you even call them, the segments of the sidewalk are kind of uneven, and at one point I tripped and caught myself before I went totally down, but I thought, I must look pretty ridiculous right about now. I hope nobody was driving by that knew me. And I thought it would have been nice, maybe not nice, but maybe I should have had a cane with me or something, and it put me in mind of a story about a cane that I want to share with you. I want to offer or share with you a story from one of our more prophetic voices, not to say offensive voices, of recent decades. You may not like him very much. I'm not always sure that I like him all the time, to be honest with you. But like him or not, Will Campbell has engaged us and has found ways to reveal the masquerades of so many Christians over the years. So if you will, hear this story with me from the Gospel according to St. Will. He was given a walking stick by a man that he described as barely literate. But that friend had a certain talent. He was able to take scrap wood and turn it into something beautiful. And one day this friend was rooting around in an old barn, and he found a piece of what he described as wild cherry. I don't know what wild cherry is. I know what cherry basically looks like, but this wild cherry in an abandoned barn, and he took it and he put it aside for years, did nothing with it. But eventually there came a time when he decided to make something, and he made it for Will. He made him a cane, a walking stick. And it was a stick so beautiful that Campbell compared it to the gospel story itself. He said he turned something tired and ugly and useless into something beautiful and very, very useful. Even controversial. You see, he took that stick with him on a trip. He went to the airport with his wife. They were flying out, I don't remember where they were flying out of, but this is in the days before the TSA and all that, but they still had metal detectors, as you probably recall. I can remember, in fact, it was right before September 2001, going through the airport in Dulles, and I put my bag on the conveyor belt and it went on through, and I swear that the woman looking at that monitor in front of her never even glanced at it. It just went right on through. It scared me to death. But that didn't happen in this case, because after Will went put his bag up on the conveyor belt to go through the metal detector, he walked through, using his cane, through the one that you walk through, and he got to the other side, and after he'd gotten there, one of the men with a badge on, one of the officers, directed him to come back to the other side and put his cane on the conveyor belt. Now, Will, at this point, if you know anything about him, being challenged like that probably didn't sit well. And he felt like he was being harassed because it had already gone through a metal detector. So he slowly walked back through to the other side of the metal detector again, where you put things in, And he got there, put it on the belt, and it went on through. But Will just stood still. So then the badge said, all right, sir, you can come on and pick up your stick. And Will was in no mood to be cooperative. He said, no, you bring it on back to me. I've done what you want. Now you do what I want. Mister, can you walk without that cane? Son, and I'm calculating, he was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s at this point. So he could get away with saying son. He said, son, we don't pay you to ask medical questions. That's what we have doctors for. Now, I want you to bring that cane back to me. The badge refused. He said, mister, if you want your cane, you're going to have to come and get it. So Will did. He lowered himself to the floor, got down on his gut, and pulled himself along. And then he got to the other side of that conveyor belt contraption and reached up with a shaking hand, pulled his cane down, and slowly began to pull himself up. And all the while, the people behind him began lobbing grenades at the badge. You can imagine, he said he heard things like, look at what he's doing to that poor man. And so on. He went on like that. Meanwhile, with all their attention focused on the badge, Will took his cane and he kind of twirled it and he just scampered off down the walkway. Now his wife, after all of this, as they were walking off rather hurriedly, she looked at him and said, are you into the grape? Then she said to him, why do you do things like that? He said, because I'm a Baptist. He said, I wasn't raised a robot. I'm a thinking, rational person who makes decisions for himself. I can read any book, including the Bible, and I can interpret it with whatever mental faculties the good Lord gave me. That's why. Where have those Baptists gone? What's happened to us? I remember Professor Estep telling us that we came from people who were drowned in the River Amstel for what they believed. I remember hearing about Thomas Helwys and reading his story about how he was thrown into prison by King James, the same one who's embossed on many of your Bibles, only because Helwys had the temerity to say to the king, you are not a god. How many Baptists were on the bridge in Selma? Probably right many. How many worship despite not knowing whether their exit from the church and the hymn that they sang to the old wooden cross would be met by one that was burning? Too many to say. How many Baptists helped people from all walks of life, those that burned crosses and also those that burned their draft cards? We will never know. We were the scorned, the persecuted, asked for 2 opinions, get 3 answers, would not give in on any matter of right, total separation of church and state, always looking out for the meek and the poor, no matter what the cost. What on earth happened? Well, I've got one answer. You know what? I think that in all of our stated efforts to build a community, to proclaim that God lives, to worship only Him, we really desired something else. Respectability. Instead of conviction, we wanted convenience. And in the process, we sold out the Messiah who died for us for our steeples and our gymnasiums and our buses and our flags. The price was way, way too high. We're satisfied. We're happy with ourselves. We seek the consent of the culture that surrounds us. We like the comfort that it affords. And I don't know that there's any amount of wrongdoing that will shake it. It might be, to quote a president who was himself a Quaker, civilization as we know it. But if you're a Baptist, it's really not all that civilized. Think about it. Think about the life of the poor for a minute. Hunger, payday loans, welfare, and yet we seek the power that the world offers to us without a second thought. Here's one close to my heart, The Indians of the state of Virginia can't even get recognition from the federal government, despite what's happened to them for 400 years. And it's all for political reasons. But why rock the boat? Immigrants, you're offered handouts, yes, and sometimes handcuffs. Another issue close to my heart. You know, we're wildly in favor, it seems these days, of a surveillance state. One that would make our ancestors and our faith turn in their graves. But why make anybody angry? It's enough to make me want to crawl in my stomach. We have indulged labels that define what we think we are. But I don't think that if Jesus had been a fundamentalist, he ever would have been executed. He would have grasped the offer of state power that Satan offered to him in the desert. Remember, the dominion over all the kingdoms of the world? And he wouldn't have looked back. And I've always embraced the label of moderate in Baptist life. But now that label troubles me. Because moderates would have answered Pilate probably by taking the deal that he offered. Just what moderation means, right? Making a deal. Because we're just not as convinced as we should be of the miracle-working power of the God that we claim to serve. And the cost is churches that grow emptier and emptier every Sunday. On a wall in my office hangs a charcoal portrait, I guess you'd call it, of a man named John Bunyan. And he was one of my ancestors. If my mother was here, she could tell you all the family connections and all, but I don't know them that well, but I know he was an ancestor. His most notable achievement, what he's most widely known for, was writing something called The Pilgrim's Progress, which has been one of the most popular books of all time. But to me, his most consequential act, the one that was most important, was going to jail. Going to jail because he refused to stop preaching. He lived in a jail for 16 years. He went blind. He supported his family making handicrafts in jail. I've been there. I've seen the spots that are important in his life. The church, ever since called Bunyan's Church. The spot where the jail was. I even got a chance to speak in Bunyan's church. These are shrines to me. There's no sign of Jonah there. No love for Baal, not in him. And I had another, not as famous ancestor, but equally important to my mind. Before the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson would write about how the Quakers were persecuted in the state of Virginia. They were jailed and beaten and worse. Burris, again before the Revolution, in Caroline County, gave a piece of land that he owned to his wife's family so they could form the very first Quaker meeting. They don't call it a church, they call it a meeting. The very first Quaker meeting in the state of Virginia. And then, if you go a little bit south, it's right on 301. And within a quarter mile of I-95 at Carmel Church. About a quarter mile, just a little bit south of where I was talking about a moment ago. There's a huge tree outside of something that's called Burris's Church. And under that tree, John Burris himself was arrested, again before the Revolution, because he preached what the Church of England told him he could not preach. Sidney King did a series of paintings about Baptist life years ago, and in one of those paintings you see John Burris preaching from the jailhouse window. And outside, you see, listening to him, people dressed fairly well. You see simple farmers, and you see slaves, all hanging on his words. No sign of Jonah, no bail for him. They were Baptists. And every day I wonder, am I worthy of that kind of sacrifice? Is the price really worth it to me? And I wonder if anybody else even fears the same thing or has the same concerns. I am, like Jonah was, at least in the beginning, unwilling at times to trust in God enough to follow that lead. But it's an old story. Edith Hamilton wrote wrote something very important. She wrote a lot of important things. She was very important to the Kennedys, who told their family and friends to read her books about Rome and Greece. But she also wrote one about the early Christians, Witness to the Truth. And she has this one passage in it, and I want to share with you. So great the Church of Christ came into being. So the great Church of Christ, forgive me. So the great Church of Christ came into being by ignoring the life of Christ. The fathers of the church were good men, often saintly men, sometimes men who cared enough for Christ to die for him, but they did not trust him. They could not trust the safety of his church to his way of doing things. And so they set out to make their church safe in their own way. Creeds and theologies protected it from the individual vagaries of life, riches and power against outside attacks. The church was safe. But one thing its ardent builders and defenders both failed to see, and this is important: nothing that lives can be safe. Life means danger. The more the church was hedged about with confessions of faith and defended by the mighty of the earth, the feebler its life grew. How is that any different from where we are right now? We repeat an old process. We trust in institutions. We fail to see that when we do so, we are often denigrating the God that gave us life. You know, if our heritage is any measure at all, we have, little by little, sold out to Baal. And I despair. We've been talking about eons here, 2,000 years of history. Let me take you back just a short bit of time here, 150 years. About that long ago, there was an odd little man wandering around the streets of a place called Copenhagen. And this little man, by the way, he walked around with a cane too. And this little man embodied much of what I have come to think about this issue. He wondered, will God, this is a man named Kierkegaard speaking, will God one day take away Christianity just to prove its truth? I wonder. And yet, before it's too late, I think there is still hope. Not in institutions, although God's grace has been known to work in people from time to time. It might even work in an institution from time to time too, but I wouldn't bet on it. But I do have a hope. I have a hope in you, all of you. I have a hope in every soul that tries to remedy the rejection, the discrimination, and the hatred that is so common in our world. In every hand that stretches out to the homeless and to the hungry and to the imprisoned, there is hope. I find hope in every eye that sees and calls out, "Your wife is a child of God, and you will not do that to her." I find in every person that welcomes a stranger and doesn't question why the stranger is there, because her scriptures have instructed her that that is what she is supposed to do. In every voice that calls out against the tyranny of fools and proclaims freedom not just to captives, but to all of us, because we are all prisoners of Baal now and of our own making. In them there is hope. Indeed, in every one of us that is willing to crawl along on his belly, not in subjugation, but in the name of a great cause, there too is hope. And in every word of encouragement that proclaims the truth and the reality of the victory that is already ours if we will just accept it, if only we had the courage to acknowledge it, then there too is the most hope of all. So as you go forth from here, go in the word of truth, for in it above all things there is freedom and life. In the name of the living God, in the name of his Son, who has already won the greatest battle, go forth and see the truth.